everyone, it's your girl Miracle Sims, and you are watching God, Sex, and Love. Tonight, we're going to be chatting with a gentleman named Geoff Lamb. He is a psychotherapist as well as an author, and he is all the way over in the UK. So if you're ready for this conversation, then stay tuned. Welcome back to God, Sex, and Love. I am here with Mr. Geoff Lamb. Hello, Mr. Geoff. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. It's lovely to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Lovely to have you. So you're all the way in London, am I correct?
I'm in the southwest of England, but yeah, I'm in the UK.
Oh, okay. Well, it was so funny because when I was telling my husband I had this interview, he was like, "Wow, you're international now." I'm like. But technically the podcast has already been kind of heard in different places. So it's very interesting since starting this process, like how far we've reached and everything like that. But I want to say, with the exception of maybe one other person, you're probably the first person out of the States I've interviewed.
Okay, yeah, interesting.
So yeah, so welcome.
Okay.
Welcome to
We'll see what that means maybe later on, I don't know.
Yeah, so no, I just want to say welcome to God, Sex, and Love. So
lovely, thank you.
So from what I understand, you are a sexpert. Is this correct?
That's right. To be more precise, I would call myself a psychosexual therapist, which means I help individuals and couples who are maybe having problems with their sex lives in whatever way, inhibitions, difficulty connecting with each other, difficulty connecting with themselves. Anything in that sort of area is what I deal with.
Well, I think that's awesome. I mean, obviously, here on God, Sex, and Love, we don't shy away from the conversation of sex, and I think it's very important, especially in the Christian community, that people, I guess, tap into the side of themselves as well as get, good solid information and things like that. So obviously, you're someone that's well versed and can share a little knowledge with us today. And so thank you.
I hope so. Hope that will be
coming.
Sure. Okay. So where do we start?
I know so many places we can start. Well, I know you were saying that you have a book. If you want to start with that. I
have a book that's going to be published next month. I think it's going to be available in the States and in the UK. It's called Sexual Grounding Therapy. I'll say a little bit more about what that is in a minute. Okay. And it's published by Routledge. I think that's the publisher over there. I know it's on Amazon in the States. So you can get hold of it there if you want to, or read a little bit more about it. I will talk a little bit more about it. But as I was saying earlier, one of the things that attracted me to this situation, the talk show, was that I do write something about the history of the way we've thought about sexuality and how religion has affected that in different ways, whether, I guess what I'm talking about is also whether there can be any kind of crossover, because often people think about religion, particularly the sort of patriarchal religions, as being fairly anti-sex, I think we have to give that a little bit more of in-depth thought. Is it totally true? Is it partially true? Are there some Christian beliefs that still are a bit anti-sexual, or are there other people I've talked to have a more liberal attitude? And where does sex fit in to our lives in general? And I suppose our belief systems in particular. That's something that a lot of people struggle with at the moment. I don't know.
Yeah.
Something you're familiar with?
What do you mean by that? Look,
Yeah.
I think are you too young for this conversation, actually?
I don't know. Yeah.
No, well, I'm married, so, and I'm also 35. Well, I'll be 35 this year, so I mean, I think I can talk a little bit about it,
I hope so. Yes.
I have a child now and everything, so I know something about the act at least, right?
So yes, indeed, yes. Okay.
That's not good, but basically, I mean, yeah, I think what you're saying is definitely true. There's a lot of, especially when it comes to Christianity and everything, there is this kind of taboo. Sex is a taboo subject, which is, honestly was like one of the inspirations for me because, well, one, I don't feel like it should be as taboo as it is.
No.
And if I'm, as a believer, I believe that God created sex. So that's another reason as well, where I'm like, okay, well, this is something he created, so we shouldn't shy away from the conversation just because it may be, well, I mean, I guess it depends on how you look at it, right? Some people may be, embarrassed by it or something like that. But I mean,
True.
I feel like it's a natural part of life. And so, yeah, we should have more conversations about it. And so, yeah, I think your book sounds like it's going to be, very informative and everything like that. So
well, I hope so. Yeah, I think that I suppose if you look back at the history, particularly in the kind of the way that Christianity developed in medieval times, for example, when I was doing my research, I encountered incredible things like there were a lot of days in the year when you couldn't have sex. So you couldn't have sex on a saint's day, you couldn't have sex on Friday, you couldn't have sex on Sunday. It was like there were very few times when it was okay to have sex. I mean, so there were some fairly antiquated beliefs about sex. Well, they were antiquated because they were in medieval times. And I don't know, well, you look at some of the early Christian writers, I think it was people like Thomas Aquinas, who wrote about sex as well. If we have to do it, we have to do it to procreate the world. But on the other hand, we shouldn't enjoy it, And this was, and so I guess Christianity gets a bad press in that respect. That that the early fathers of the church, and literally I use that word deliberately, they were guys who were quite scared of their own sexual impulses, and they were particularly scared of women as sexual creatures. And so you have the whole kind of the Madonna and the whore archetypes. So if you like sex, you've got to be a whore. If you're more pure, then you're a Madonna and you don't like it, or you put up with it in order to have children. And this, it's done all of us, I think, quite a lot of harm, those kind of beliefs. Now, hopefully we're a bit more enlightened now, but some of that is still a hangover in the way that some religious people think about sex.
I think that's the interesting thing. You hear so many different types of, not just responses or interpretations, but you hear about like how people sometimes maybe they take their authority or whatever the case is and put something in the Bible, put something in the way they respond to it that wasn't necessarily there. For me, I don't recall like in my reading, and I won't sit here and act like I'm just, obviously I Bible study, try to do my best to Bible study every day, especially nowadays. But I wouldn't sit here and act like I'm a scholar, right? But in my readings, now there are some times where it's mentioned where we shouldn't have sex, but what you said isn't in there. You know what I'm saying? Like it's.
I know. But I think that's the problem, isn't it? That obviously there's two things here. One is how we interpret what's written in the Bible. And actually, if you look particularly specifically at things that Jesus actually said, he didn't say a lot about sex in general, but he said a lot about relationships. And it all seems fairly sex positive when I think about it. You know, what I've read, I wouldn't call myself any kind of Bible scholar, but I've certainly read it. I was brought up in the Christian church in the UK, and I was a choral singer. I used to sing in the choir and stuff. So there it was. And I still love church music. So, that's my link really. But, there was nothing I sort of saw in what Jesus said about relationships and loving each other, which I would see as that contradictory. But I think sometimes the way it's been interpreted has been more to sort of suit certain social attitudes, which you find. Things like women being subservient to men, for example, is a way that a lot of there are ideas that certainly I'm quoting this to you, and you probably know much more about it, but stuff that St. Paul is supposed to have said. And again, I don't think Jesus ever said anything about that. In fact, he had women amongst his community, at least 2 Marys were part of it. And, he wasn't anti-women at all. As far as I can tell, obviously he was a man of his time, and in those days, where is it, in Israel or whatever, or in any country, women were, it was a patriarchal society. So, we've interpreted what was written down in a way that kind of sometimes tends to support what we would see as the status quo, rather than actually in a more kind of liberal way. Which can support people in having loving, committed sexual relationships, which is really, I guess, what I'm about as much as anything else. You see, which can be fulfilling for everybody, men and women.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. Yeah, definitely. I don't believe that there's any, I don't believe that sex should be, this thing where it's like, again, shying away from the conversation, feeling as if it's taboo, or feeling as if this thing that we shouldn't do, and things like that. Again, like I said, I am familiar with verses that are like, that has some stipulations to it. Obviously I read one this morning when I was doing my Bible study about how basically sexual sin is kind of like sinning against your own body. And I can kind of see now, some reasons why some of the things are in place of like not fornicating and things like that. I can kind of see in my own life how some of these things matters at the end of the day, because it's like, okay, well, there's certain ties that you have to people when you have sex with them. But right now, there is a thought process or a narrative that is kind of like, oh, just do whatever. But then we can kind of see consequences of that as well. I think there's a balance in the Bible, especially with the conversation of sex. And but yeah, for whatever reason, there's a lot of people that either try to, use that as an attack, or use that as or try to put their own, as we say, quote unquote, religious practices on certain things, where it's like, well, yes, that's not what the Bible says,
I get you. That's great. I wanted just to pick up on something you said, because it really makes a lot of sense to me when you talk about that just going, well, do whatever you feel like, that gets really interpreted in a way that I guess I would see as, well, if I use the word irresponsible, I'm not wanting to judge anybody, but I guess we're all trying to make sense of our own desires, impulses, how attractions and what have you. And I guess in the past, one of the things, our ways of, managing those, our sexual feelings, desires, impulses, would be to have a series of rules about, like, you can do this, you can't do that, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. And that's, I can see how that could be useful, but it ends up often making people feel guilty or making people feel bad about themselves. Okay. And so what we're trying to do when in the whole, the way I work with this sexual grounding, one of the things is to consider, okay, I'm feeling like attracted to somebody, I might want to make love with them, but we do have to think about, well, what is the context in which I'm doing that? What is our relationship? And one of the guy who originated this form of psychosexual therapy is a guy called Willem Papelius. He's a Dutch guy. And he talks about something called future perspective. So when you make love to somebody, very basically, there's all sorts of future perspectives. One is a child might result from that. That's inevitable. We are biological creatures. This is how we reproduce. Now, I know these days we have contraception, et cetera, but no contraception is 100% foolproof. So Papelius says, well, we have to think about that. Now, he's not particularly coming from a religious perspective, but it does link with what you're saying.
Yes.
And it's not it doesn't have to be a moralistic thing. It can be if that's what's important to you, but it's more like, this is a possibility. So do we have the kind of relationship where if that did happen, it wouldn't be a big problem to us? It might not be ideal, because of all sorts of constraints like money and jobs, security and all of that, living arrangements. But one of the things that I say in the book that Papelius says, if we make love, every time we make love, and there's the possibility somewhere between us that a baby could result from this, it changes the quality of our lovemaking. So it's twofold. Yeah, do you get where I'm coming from here? Okay.
I love everything you're saying here, because at the end of the day, that's the thing that I feel like, especially my generation, not to be like, it's not your generation, but what I'm saying, like the younger generation, I say me and people after me, I feel like the thing is, they're not thinking about any of that, what you just said. They're not thinking about consequences. They're not thinking about, any accountability or anything. But then, it's like doing whatever. And then at the end of the day, when there's consequences to the action, then they don't want to take responsibility for it or whatever. So, and that could be about, like, yes, the child, the example you gave, but then it could be about like diseases. That could be about all the different things that it's just sex is more than just the act. And for whatever reason, the generation after me and my generation probably included, we just kind of, it's like, you don't think about the consequences of things. And then, down the line, now you're going through life, or maybe you're struggling as a single parent, or maybe you're dealing with, issues that you have with that person or whatever the case is. And when at the end of the day, like one of the arguments, and I don't mean to get on the abortion conversation, but I had this conversation with another gentleman a few episodes back. Sure. And we were kind of talking about it and everything. And, one of the things you hear that people want to defend this to be like, oh, well, why force a woman to have a child, for example, or why would I want to have a child with someone that did X, Y, and Z to me, or whatever the case is. But I think the bigger question is like, okay, if you're not willing to have a child with whoever this person is, then why are you having sex with this person? Like, did you think about that before you did it? Or
okay, so then what we have to, there's certainly something, truthful in what you're saying there. But then we have to look at, well, why would someone do that? So, and this is where we have to look at how we learn about sex and what we learn about sex. Mm-hmm. And most of us don't learn about sex.
That right there.
Because, you know, as you say, you mentioned earlier that, you know, parents particularly do not want to have that conversation, do not want to give their example to their children of how sex is integrated into an adult relationship. And when you don't get that, say as a young child, as a teenager or whatever, then, you know, you're constantly, well, first of all, you're adrift, really, in terms of, well, where, you know, what is sex about? The other thing that's difficult for people probably of your generation and also of mine, you know, I mean, I'm, you know, just we knew even less about sex probably than you did, because it was even more taboo to talk about it, you know. These days there are lots of sources of information, some good, some bad, but you know, what we don't get is an integrated kind of initiation, as it were, into, well, what is sex about? So you can't go to your mum or your dad and say, as a teenager, and say, well, this guy fancies me and should I sleep with him or not? Or what does it mean if I do? What does it mean if I don't? And, you know, the difficulty is when we come from what I call a moralistic perspective, which could be religious, it could be from any other angle, then your kids won't talk to you. Because if you say to your mum or your dad, I really fancy this guy and I'm really turned on by him and I want to have sex with him, but is it okay? Can I do it? What does it mean if I, you know, then often there's a condemnation. You shouldn't have those feelings because, you know, it's not right for you to have those feelings and, you know, it's lustful and blah, 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 all of this stuff. So then the next time you don't talk to your parents, it becomes a big sin or big thing that you're not supposed to do. So then you go out and you do it anyway because your parents have kind of discouraged you. So this is where it comes from, really. If parents can advise from a perspective is actually sex is a beautiful thing and fancying somebody is a beautiful thing. And it's lovely that you appreciate some guy or some woman's body that, you know, and that all this thing there is about them that's lovely that makes you want to, you know, to have sex. And it's lovely what goes on in your body. Your turned onness is lovely. You know, it, as you said, if we want to look at it from a religious perspective, God designed this body. You know, that would be a good perspective. So, you know, including the bit that gets turned on, you know. So right. Again, if I kind of dream my way into that, you know, presumably he had something in mind when he did that, you know. So this is not in itself sinful, bad, or whatever. It is what it is. The question is, how do we explore it? What do we do with it? You know, So then, if you're a parent, you have to say to yourself, yes, I was a teenager once. I had those feelings too, you know, and now I have this lovely relationship with your mum and we express our sexuality and you tell your kids that you have sex, you know, because otherwise they think, you know, sex is just for young people. This is a bizarre thing. I've done a few presentations, I haven't done any lately, but, you know, in public forums. And one of the things I ask people to do is, how is it to think about your parents having sex? For most people, it's a real, ugh, they don't do that, do they? And some of that is down to the parents, because parents are so inhibited about letting their children know that actually they are still sexual beings.
Right.
You know? I'm 69. I still have sex.
Hey.
Why not? You know, I love my wife. I love having sex with her. Not as often as I did when I was 25 or 35 or whatever, but enough, because it's part of our life. And if younger people know that, they don't get so desperate about it. We don't have to do it all at once. We can wait because we've got the whole of our lives to enjoy this.
Exactly.
And then it's that gives them more of a sense of themselves. I loved what you said about the sin is a sin against your body. And I wouldn't use those terms. They're not very kind of familiar to me in therapy, but I would say, it's something where we overstretch ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We go beyond what we feel comfortable with for all sorts of reasons,
Mm-hmm.
And it can be because people have told us it's bad and sinful, which actually makes it more exciting.
I can see what you mean by that.
It doesn't literally, but it does because, if there's that climate of people telling you, don't do this, don't do that, this is bad, you're a young person growing up, there's a contradiction. I have all these things in my body going on,
Mm-hmm.
and you go through puberty, all of the systems, the hormonal systems start to develop, and you start to be attracted to people, and your body is telling you one thing, and people who are in, authority figures in your life are telling you something else. So you've got a big conflict there. And that's difficult for kids to handle.
Yes, I agree. I love everything you're saying now because, I do believe that we talk about it all the time here on GSL, how much parenting affects just everybody, right?
Very much so.
It affects me and vice to everybody, and it just affects the new generations and everything like that. And so, you're correct. I do believe that parents should let their children know, like, hey, this is something that, this is what I do. In my case, this is what I do, something we do with your husband, or my husband, whatever case it is. It's like, and not make it be this, again, taboo thing or this thing where it's like, it's bad, because I can't say, to me personally, I have felt as if sometimes I can say that I've already confessed here on God Sister Love, so people already know.
Cool.
I have a higher drive than my husband. And so sometimes I'm like, my drive is just like, I don't even need it because he doesn't, whatever the case is, or maybe we're not on the same page or whatever.
Okay.
But, but I understand that, okay, that there's nothing wrong with, but I have had those questions of like, is something wrong with me? Like, why am I like this? Like, why am I so always, or whatever? And so, but I know that, different people are different or whatever the case is, but it's just, I think it boils down to, again, just being open and honest about what the situation is, and then also open and honest about the consequences. Because I think that for me, as I grew up, my mom did kind of talk about it, and I remember learning things in school. So for me, knowing about like the consequences of sex, like, the things that can happen, like, again, having a child or getting a disease or whatever, I just knew I wasn't personally ready for any consequences. So for whatever, for that, as well as my moral compass and everything like that, I held on, until before I made that decision, So again, I believe having open conversations, definitely when they're teens, but honestly, I feel like, you have to have them when they're younger now, just because of everything that's going on. But
well, I think you do have to have the conversations. I mean, children become aware of themselves, the difference between boys and girls. You become aware of that maybe 4, 5, 6 years old. You start to notice, what I've got is different from what little girls have got, or mummy's different from daddy,
Yeah.
And if that's a different conversation, but that needs to be had as well. Mm-hmm. And isn't it great that we're different? And isn't it great that we have those bits of our body that, of course, we don't normally go around displaying them, but in the home, you see those things. You see your sister in the bath or whatever, and you see she's different from you, and that's again something to be celebrated,
Right.
rather than and you know, and whatever, all of these things. The thing is that what we talk about, the concept that we talk about in sexual grounding is a concept called regulation. And I guess for me, it's very different from control. If someone tells you something's bad and you shouldn't do it, they're trying to control you. Okay? If your mum says to you, okay, you go to her in this conversation I was thinking about earlier, and you say, oh, I met this boy, and you know, I have these feelings, and you know, what's this about? What does it mean? Did you have those feelings? And she says, well, it's great that you're having those feelings, because that's part of a natural process. But it's great that you came to talk to me, because maybe you have to think about, well, you know, if you take the feelings further, is that really what you want? And you're not telling her there's anything bad or sinful or that she shouldn't do, but you're telling her, yes, your body is wonderful. It's similar to my body, if you're the mother, and I have those feelings, and so it's natural that you would have them. And you know, in a committed, in a relationship, those feelings are what can cement the relationship, can bring you closer together, and can be, I don't know, a source of great joy and pleasure, you know. And so there's no stage at which you have to say, if you do that, it is wrong and you'll go to hell or whatever it is. I'm sorry, I have a problem with that, but you know, there's a difference. But it's more like if you do that, as I say, you're going beyond what your body actually wants to do. Bodies are excited by different things, like food, by excitement, doing dangerous things. But you know, I don't know, climbing trees or what other things that kids get up to, you know.
Right.
And that's all well and good. But in any other form of activity, it's a question of, well, you know, what feels good to you, what you actually feel good about yourself doing, you know. And it's not you know, we don't have to make people feel, I don't know, less than or bad. This is where I'm coming from. But you know, that we're saying the same things. We have to, you know, as I say, when you are in a relationship with somebody and you have sex with somebody, it's not, you know, it doesn't exist in a vacuum, you know. The trouble is we kind of behave as though it does sometimes, you know.
That's true.
You know, it exists within a relationship. It exists in a context. It exists in a societal context, and it has a profound effect on us. Not, you know, I guess not just about, you know, obviously producing a child is one thing. Obviously, the risk of infection, there's things we have to think about these days. Probably more than I'm from the pre-AIDS generation, I have to say. You know, we didn't have to think about that so much, but there were, you know, STIs, you know, still in those days. So we had to think about things like that. Wow. Anyhow, so I hope that gives you some idea of what my book is about. There are a lot. There's a whole book there, and I've kind of touched on just different little bits of it, the history. And also where sex lives, I think, for me, it's in the context of relationship, whatever the nature of that relationship might be. Sex is something that's potentially a fulfilling, joyful part of all of us. And that this is what I hope the people I work with are able to discover, and I could kind of guide them in that a little bit, you know, to discovering which is, as you say, at the moment, the climate is that we have a lot of information around about sex.
Mm-hmm.
And, there is a lot of information on the sort of things that you talked about, the sort of, protection against diseases and the consequences of having children and what have you. But somehow or other, we don't do the things we need to do in order to look after ourselves and our partners. And we have to think about that. Why are we not? Now, one, the way I'm looking at that is that we actually lose touch with ourselves. I would say would call it our deeper selves, again, you could say our spiritual selves if you want, and that makes some sense. I can connect with that. But so we are more acting out stuff that we've learned, I guess, in our upbringing. I would say this is the way I think it happens. Mm-hmm. So sometimes we do use sex if we're not feeling confident in ourselves, our value, our, if you like, attractiveness, but certainly our value. We talk a lot about self-esteem. If they've got low self-esteem or something like that, we might end up having sex. So if this person wants to have sex with me, then I must be all right.
Yes, I totally understand what you're saying. Like, honestly, you got me thinking, because it's like we think that we're invincible until we realize that we're not.
I think that's an interesting way to phrase it. The reality of sex is that, the way I'm looking at it, the only way to have, I would say, connected sex, intimate sex, open-hearted sex, whatever, is you have to feel all right anyway. You have to feel okay about yourself. Yeah. So when you're having sex, you're not trying to prove anything, either by just the sheer act of having it, and also in how you have it, So, a lot of people I come across have what I call unconnected sex. So the sex is about proving something. Like for a guy, it's like, I'm a virile guy, I can do it with lots of women. Or for women, it's more about, I must be attractive because he wants to have sex with me. And, or I don't know, I'm not so familiar with how it is for women, not being one, but
But, I totally understand, yeah.
And in a way, those are, while we're busy with that, where does our partner go in that? How can we connect with our partner if I'm thinking, like, as a guy, I must keep it up for a long time so that she has an orgasm, and then I'm going to prove what a stud I am. That's all about me and my ego. It's nothing to do with my female partner at all. And actually, guys are really surprised when I tell them that actually women don't like this. They might manage to have an orgasm, but they don't feel connected to the guy they're having sex with. And for women are wiser than us in some ways. They have a feeling that if they don't feel connected, I would say at a heart level, then the sex is not so good. I don't know. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. And that's the thing. Beyond asking the questions of like, why would I do this if I don't want, say for example, the consequences of sex? If I don't want the consequences of sex with that particular person, then why would I do it? But even so, with what you just said, it's like, again, if I'm not comfortable even in myself, and then I'm not connected to this person, that's another reason for us to kind of, like I said, tackle this whole conversation of sex, because it's like you said, it's just become this thing where people just do. It's become this thing where there's no connection, hardly. And I think that's where some of the problems come in, because it's like, again, so you're not thinking about the future, right? And then you're not thinking about the moment either. You know?
So what are you thinking about? You're thinking about, well, how do I look? How am I performing? You know, how can I make myself feel better, or how can I make myself feel attractive or virile or whatever? I'm just aware of time here. I think I need to round this up a little bit. I don't know about you, because I've got somebody to see at 2:00. But so how can I don't know how the best way to summarize what we've said so far. I hope it's making sense to you.
Yes, a lot of sense to me. I appreciate you taking out the time again to chat about your book and yourself. Is there anywhere that people can reach you, or?
They can reach me on, if you look at the emails I sent to you, my website is on there. And yeah, I don't know whether you can bring that up.
Yeah, we'll put that there. Mm-hmm.
That's the best way to reach me. I will send you a link to my book as well after this is finished. As I say, it's on Amazon.com in the States. If you just look up sexual grounding therapy, it comes up. So, but I'll send you a link to the publisher so you can see how to get it direct from the publisher. And I think it is being brought out on both sides of the Atlantic on the same day. So, okay. Been a pleasure talking to you.
Yes, sir. Nice talking to you too. And congratulations on your book.
Thank you very much. Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for watching God, Sex, and Love. And thank you to Mr. Geoff Lamb for the conversation this evening. Good night.